Well, thank you, Bill and Kate, for having me for this session. It is truly my pleasure to be here with you today, sharing proven ideas and strategies when it comes to planning your backyard vegetable garden. It is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I've been gardening since I was really, really young. It was something that I used to do with my father. He was into vegetable gardening, and many of our fresh produce we harvested from our garden. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico in a completely different climate, so it's been really interesting learning to garden in New Jersey. I moved to New Jersey 3 years ago, and it's been so exciting to grow cool season crops and warm season crops. And so my goal today is to hopefully share with you strategies that you can implement as you're planning your vegetable garden for this year, whether you are a beginner or an advanced gardener. I hope you can have some takeaways that you can implement in your plan for this year. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so when it comes to planning your vegetable garden, let's consider some of the benefits of why would you go through this trouble to plan your vegetable garden. So making a plan for your vegetable garden will definitely help you save lots of time, right? It'll help you make the most of your space, of your limited space, by planting strategically. It'll definitely help you in minimizing pest and disease pressure, especially if you've grown certain crops before and you know that you've had certain pests in your garden. You can plan moving forward, maybe looking into certain varieties that provide resistance, and other things that we're going to discuss today in this webinar. Making a plan for your vegetable garden helps you minimize the physical effort. One of the benefits of gardening is that we move our bodies, right? We get some exercise, but planning to minimize physical effort can help us be more efficient in our garden as well. And planning in advance gives us the opportunity to be more creative in our design, in our layout, maybe in our crop selection as well. And it can definitely help us minimize the overall environmental impact within our vegetable garden. So if that sounds interesting or intriguing to you, let's move on to the overview of what developing a plan for your vegetable garden looks like. So there is sort of like a flow, a rhythm, a process into developing a plan that works for your particular site. And it doesn't matter the size, it doesn't matter the location where you're in New Jersey. It all starts with observation and in doing a proper site assessment of your site, of the place that you're maybe thinking of locating your garden. And we're going to dive deep into site assessment. Once you have chosen the ideal site where you're going to install your vegetable garden, you want to move on into creating a framework for mapping your vegetable garden, mapping your planting plan, creating a schedule, choosing varieties that are going to thrive in your location, choosing varieties and crops that you're going to consume from your garden. And then also looking into cropping techniques that can help us either maximize space, maximize harvest. And in today's webinar, I'm going to be sharing some ideas that will help you exactly do that, maximize the space in your vegetable garden. So first things first, Location, choosing the appropriate site for you to install your vegetable garden is a vital part of your planning process. Location can definitely make or break your vegetable garden. So choosing the right location will ensure that you have a solid foundation for the crops that you plan to grow. Vegetables thrive in full sun, but we can definitely group them into different categories depending on the amount of direct sunlight or the period of direct sunlight that they'll require for them to thrive and grow to their full potential. So when it comes to vegetables that bear fruit, we're talking about tomatoes, eggplants, watermelons, pumpkins, among others. They are the ones that require the most amount of direct sunlight in the vegetable garden. So they'll need at least 8 hours of direct sunlight for them to thrive, grow, and bear fruit. Other crops that can thrive in less amount of direct sunlight would be root crops like beets, radishes, or onions. They can grow very well between having 5 or 6 hours of direct sunlight. And if you cannot identify a location within your property or your backyard or the site where you're going to install your vegetable garden, if you can't identify a location with full sun, and you can only get around 4 hours of direct sunlight, that'll be a perfect spot for leafy greens, right? So if you're in this range where once you do your site assessment, you see that you have shaded areas or that you only receive about 4 hours of direct sunlight in that particular site, then that's going to be a good site for you to try leafy greens, from spinaches to kale to Swiss chards to mustards, arugula, among many others. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the sun as it relates to the ideal location. So as you all know, the sun rises from the east and sets on the west, right? And as it travels, it casts shadows within our property if we have certain structures within the area, or tall structures or trees. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the following slides. But ideally, within your location, you want to look for a place where you could locate your plot oriented from north to south, ideally, so that it receives the most amount of sunlight exposure. That doesn't always apply in all the scenarios, right? And we want to think about when it comes to the sunlight, we want to keep in mind that so planet Earth is at a tilt, right? As it moves around the sun. So the sun is never really hitting us straight, right? So even at the longest day of the year, it still is coming at us at a tilt, right? So we want to be mindful about that when we do a site assessment of our property. So when we're observing potential areas within our backyard where we're going to install our vegetable garden, we definitely want to mark any tall structures between your potential site and the south facing part of your property, right? So as the sun sets, as the sun travels from the east to the west, it's going to cast a shadow on those structures that will stand in between your potential site and the south-facing side of your property. So that's just something that you want to be mindful about. You want to keep it in mind so that you don't so that you don't install your garden in a location where it's going to be casted a shadow by either trees or tall structures within your property. Okay. As I just mentioned, we definitely don't want to install our garden underneath the canopy of the trees. We want to avoid at all cost placing or installing our gardens near trees or underneath their canopy or even above the root zone of trees and shrubs, as they will compete for resources, for water, for nutrients, for space as well. So as you check your site, as you observe within your backyard, keep this in mind so that you can more or less foretell which structures can potentially cause shade to the areas of your garden. And then when it comes to trees, you definitely want to be mindful and aware about black walnuts. If you have black walnuts within your property, do keep in mind that these trees, they do exude a component through the roots, which we know as jugalone. So it comes out from the roots, and it becomes a limiting factor for many vegetables, as this component will kill vegetables. So if you have a black walnut tree within your property, you definitely don't want to locate your vegetable garden near that black walnut tree. And there certainly are other plants that are tolerant to this jugalan component. You can look it up online. There are many resources that provide a listing, but when it comes to vegetables, you want to avoid installing your vegetable garden and near a black walnut tree. Whoop, there we go. Oops, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so moving on from shades to soil. So when it comes to the soil, you want to make sure that the site that you choose has good, proper drainage, right? Vegetables don't like to have their feet wet. So you want to pay attention when heavy rains set in. You want to make sure that that site remains drained even with heavy on and off sets of rain. So good drainage is vital for the vegetable garden. When it comes to the soil, if you're going to be using your native soil, of course, we want to encourage you to definitely get your soil tested. When you test your soil, you'll check for many components that are important for plant growth and development, like the fertility, the pH range of your soil. If you need to make perhaps some soil amendments, you'll get all that information within your soil test report. So if you've never done a soil test before within your property, it's a really easy process. I have shared a link which we'll be sharing with you afterwards. It'll take you to our Rutgers soil testing laboratory, which will give you all the breakdown, all the information of how to collect your soil, fill out the samples, and ship it to our lab. And so for vegetable gardens, they like nice, loose, fertile soil with good drainage. When it comes to the pH range, if you've never heard the word pH before, it's basically a measurement that we use to measure the level of acidity within the soil or alkalinity. It goes all the way from 0 to 14. 7, it's basically the middle, the neutral stage. So for vegetables, we're looking to maintain our soil in a pH range from 6 to 6.5, which is what we call, I missed the word in English, here we go, a slightly acidic soil. And an additional consideration, especially in urban areas or more suburban areas or older homes or homes that were built prior to 1978 that might have been painted with lead paint, you do want to add your lead test to your soil test kit just to make sure that your levels, if just to double check if you might have lead within your soil components. And in fact, if you do have lead contamination, that soil test report will give you recommendations on how to proceed. Okay. And then other things that you should consider when you're going through the process of selecting the site where you're going to install your vegetable garden is access to water. Really, really, really important. At some point, and then throughout your growing season, you're going to have to provide water to your crops to have a good yield. And especially during the summertime, you don't want to be hauling large quantities of water to your plot. So keep this in mind. Having a water source near the site. And if you don't have one, consider making one available so that there are better chances of you to water your plants, which is vital. Another thing you want to consider is the proximity of your vegetable garden to your kitchen or your home, right? If it's closer, it's most probably that you're going to go tend the garden and go harvest and use your produce. So take that into account. Another thing you have to consider and should plan for is protection. Protection from wildlife. Deer will require fencing. They will devour all your vegetables and your leafy greens. So just be mindful and plan for that. There are many resources available for you to get the proper information to know what type of fencing you should use. Keep in mind when it comes to fencing, you do want to check with your town clerk, your zoning office. You want to make sure there might be some permits that might be required. There might be some fencing heights and limits within your ordinances. So just be mindful and make sure that you verify with your town clerk before you install your fence for your vegetable garden. And then last but certainly not least, access to tools, right? Gardening requires a set of tools that you'll be using frequently to maintain your garden. So you want to make sure, you want to at least try to have your tools as close as possible to your vegetable garden so that they're accessible when you need them. Okay, so at this stage, you have walked your property or the site where you're planning to install your vegetable garden. You have made all the observations. And so when it comes to planning, it's always a great idea to put things on paper as you're mapping these down. So you want to make notes. You want to definitely measure the area, the length and the width of the space where you are going to potentially install your garden. You're going to need a set of tools. You're going to take a pencil. You're going to take a compass and a measuring tape. As part of this webinar, I forgot to mention, you're going to be receiving this worksheet. It gives you a list of the things that you should take and the things that you should be keeping in mind as you do a site assessment of your property. So you can take that with you to the field, to your patio as you're observing. But you want to take a compass because you want to make sure, you want to double check the cardinal points within your site. All right. If you have a smartphone, you have a built-in compass, you just have to make sure that you want to calibrate it before you use it. If not, you can use Google Earth to check out your property. So definitely you need to check your cardinal points in that site and you want to write it down. You want to make notes within that map of any tall structures, as we discussed prior, any tall structures that can provide shade to that particular area. You also want to make note of your water source location within that site. And it is a great opportunity to also make notes of any environmental factors that can affect your the vegetable garden, like for example, any wet areas that you might have for drainage, or dry areas, or areas where there's a lot of wind that might require to install some type of windbreaker for your vegetable garden. So all these things, you want to write them down, and this is how you're going to create the framework for your planting plan for your garden. And you want to make sure that you calculate the square footage available within that site. And then you simply do that by measuring the length and the width, and then you multiply that both in feet, and that's how you get the square footage of your garden. And then with this part of the process, you're going to be building up, you're going to be adding more information. So this is your starting point. This is a great way to observe your location and choose your site and make all those important notes so that you can keep them in mind as you continue to build on your vegetable garden plan. Okay, so you have already selected the site. Now we're moving on to another section, which is choosing what type of garden do you want to install for your property. So there are three main types of gardens. We have container gardens, we have traditional gardens, right here in the left, and then we have raised beds. And I'm going to go through each one of them, explaining the pros and the cons. So starting off with traditional gardens. Traditional gardens, they are grown in ground in rows. They tend to be typically designed in straight long rows, but they definitely don't have to be. You can get creative and you can create sort of curves or even arches, but you have to be mindful of the plant arrangement, and we're going to talk a little bit about that further down the road. They are definitely less expensive. They require less materials to construct the in-ground rows. They are labor intensive as they require to prepare the soil, prepare the rows. If there are drainage considerations that you have to improve the drainage, which is my current case. So right now, my vegetable garden, I garden in a community garden. Right now I live in an apartment, and so I'm growing all my veggies and herbs in a community garden. It's been a great experience. But however, in that site, the drainage it's really slow. There's poor infiltration. So then in that case, what we did is we raised the garden beds, right, with no particular structure surrounding it. They're in-ground rows, but they're simply raised, and that definitely helps with the drainage for that site. Which means that I have to, during the summertime, I definitely do have to water more than my neighbors, because the water drains now faster because the rows are raised. But I prefer it that way compared to having the roots of the vegetables wet for prolonged periods of time, which will make them rot. One of the disadvantages is they tend to get compacted because with all of the walking around the bed, so they are definitely compacted faster and compared to other structures that we're going to talk about later. And if you're not complementing this type of gardening with some type of mulching to cover the pathways, and even in the beds, weeds can definitely be an issue. Okay. And then raised beds are basically garden beds that they are raised and they are contained with a structure surrounding it. So there are different materials that you can use to construct and install raised beds. And we're going to talk a little bit about them in the following slides. So raised beds are great in the sense that they provide a fresh start. So if you build the raised beds to according to your needs, they can be constructed tailor-made for your site, or you can purchase them already prefabricated. I have a slide about some prefabricated raised beds kits if you're not familiarized with them. So one of the great things about raised beds is you can construct them to the height that works best for you or for the people that are going to be tending and maintaining the garden. And it as I mentioned before, it does provide a fresh start, which means that it'll allow you to start with new soil. So if you need to amend the soil in this particular case, you can bring in a fresh new blend of soil for those raised beds. And you can even also mix it with some of your native soil if you want to use it as well. So typically in the raised bed scenario, the custom made soil, the soil mix that is typically used within raised beds, it's a combination of topsoil, compost, and soil-less medias, which could be coco coir or peat moss with vermicular and perlite. This particular component helps in providing good water retention and promoting good drainage as well within the soil. Raised beds, since they are raised, they will provide good drainage. So if you have a drainage issue in your site, raised beds might be a good fit for you. But since they are raised and they have better drainage, they also dry out quicker than in-ground beds. So you just have to want to be mindful about that. The soil rarely gets compacted. One of the ideas behind raised beds is that we don't step in the soil where we're growing our veggies and our herbs. So we use pathways to walk around, but we don't walk inside of the raised beds. So there is basically no compaction within that soil. Pathways can be well defined when we're in a raised bed scenario. When we're using raised beds, it's a level playing field, right? So you fill up your beds, level it out, and so it provides the opportunity to grow plants at higher densities within the same enclosed space. And so, which means potentially fewer weeds as plants shade the surrounding areas within the raised beds. Raised beds also warm up faster since they are raised from the soil. They do warm earlier in the spring, which will allow you some time to start your seeds earlier than perhaps your neighbors. And there are some other practices that you can implement within raised beds to warm the soil up even more with the type of mulch that you use. It could be plastic mulch. It's a black covering that you can lay over the soil of your raised bed. Then you'll make holes to plant your plants when the time comes. And this this black mulch, was a black fabric, in conjunction to the raised bed, will help you increase a little bit the temperature earlier in the spring to give you an earlier start within your garden. And so another good thing about raised beds, aesthetics. So they could be very attractive. You can build them and make them blend with your with the design of your home, with your exterior design. You can paint the lumber in different colors so that they blend with the rest of the components of your property. And then one of the cons of raised beds is that they tend to be more pricey. They do require more materials to build the beds, and also an investment for installing these structures as well. Okay, so when it comes to the size of the raised bed, this is a really common question we get at the Master Gardener Helpline. I'm building my raised beds. How big should they be? So with raised beds, one thing you want to keep in mind, it's the width of the raised bed. You'll see one of the standard recommendations is 3 feet in width. And that is because that measurement allows for you to work the raised bed from one side. So you can extend your arm and you can tend your garden from one side of the raised bed, right? In terms of width, I don't recommend you exceed 4 feet in width because of the same reason, right? You won't be able to work the raised bed from only one side. So you'll reach maybe midway, but then you'll have to walk on the other side to tend the other side of the raised bed. That's okay with you. That's not a problem, but you want to keep that in mind in case you need to mount your raised bed next to a structure, right? And then if you won't be able to if you're not able to reach that raised bed from the back, right, then that's going to be a limiting factor. You're not going to be able to reach the whole width from just one side. So standard measurements are 3 feet in width. As far as the length goes, it is really determined by the space that you have available within the project, within the site, and the crops that you're going to grow, right? So, but in terms of how deep or profound, or the height of the raised bed, it should be at least 6 inches, and that's going to work fine for leafy greens, herbs. But the ideal measurement, if you're looking to expand and if you're looking to have at least root crops and other fruiting crops, the ideal depth should be at least 12 inches. And as I mentioned before, the height can be adjusted to your needs. So if you're looking to minimize physical effort and you're looking to tame your garden standing up, you can build your raised beds. The standard measurement would be from 30 to 32 inches, right? So that you can work standing. And that way you don't have to bend over to tame your garden. And with raised beds, and you're going to see some pictures of this moving forward, you can also add other components, trellises, so that you can grow crops vertically within that same structure. In terms of materials, there's a broad range of materials that you can use to construct your raised beds. So you can use from lumber to bricks and stone, and even what we're now, what do you call them? Oh my goodness, the raised bed kits made from plastic lumber or artificial lumber. So when it comes to wood, if you're looking for wood that is non-resistant, rot resistant. Cedar is definitely a perennial favorite for raised beds. It is an attractive wood. It is it is said to be rot resistant, but the reality is eventually that wood is gonna rot in that place where it makes contact with soil, right? But it's long-standing. It is lightweight. It is easy to work with. But one of the disadvantages that it's that it is definitely more expensive than other lumber. Other options for wood would be pressure. Oops, sorry about that. Pressure treated wood. So when it comes to pressure treated wood for the vegetable garden, they're definitely much more affordable than cedar. But you do want to keep in mind that you don't want to use the old type of pressure treated wood, which have components that have been taken out of the market now. The modern version of the pressure treated wood uses high concentrations of copper. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry about that. There we go. So in terms of I lost my train of thought. Okay. In terms of the newer pressure treated wood, so it is compared to the previous components, it is definitely less toxic. But I am yet to read a compelling research from the EPA or other government agencies. So it's definitely the material, the data that it's out there. It does definitely state it as safer. But if you're concerned about pressure treated wood, well, then use other alternatives for your home garden. Another material that you could use to build your raised beds are bricks, stone, cement blocks. When it comes to cement blocks, you want to keep in mind that eventually, so cement contains lime, eventually that could be leached into your soil and it could raise your pH. So this is just something that you should be mindful about. If you use these types of blocks, you might want to test your soil every year or every other year, your pH on your soil every year or every other year, because you might need to make amendments to make sure that you have that pH at that ideal level for your veggie crops. And then within this slide, I've put some tools that'll help you in the process. So this soil calculator tool, it's a really nice website. It's really helpful in giving you the amount of, in figuring out the amount of soil that you're gonna need for your raised beds. So you just put in the measurements of your raised bed and it'll give you the quantity of soil that you're gonna need. And so that's gonna help you in calculating the components of your soil for your raised beds. And then over here, it's not an ad for the website. They just have really nice designs and layouts. So it's a good one to take a look at to get some ideas of what different measurements for the raised beds. Okay. So these are just some examples. Raised beds don't have to always be in a rectangle shape. This one in particular is U-shaped, so it's 3 raised beds installed together. This one right here was at a 32 height for these clients wanted to work their garden just standing up, minimize that physical effort. And then over here in the back, if you can see, we have a trellis that was built into that raised bed trio so that they could grow vines on the back while they will still grow some herbs and other veggies in the front in this raised bed right here. Then over here, if you have a slope, or rolling hills. Raised beds could be an option as well. This particular picture, this was a project in a school. They had a lot of cement blocks left over. Their budget was, they had a really small budget. So we used the cement blocks for 2 years until they sold enough crops and produces to purchase lumber to build their raised beds. So you have here different materials, different shapes. Right here, this one is basically a raised bed that was built with legs, sort of like in a table format. And then it has a trellis on one of the sides to grow plants vertically.
Yeah, okay.
And then another thing to consider when working with raised beds, depending on the materials that you use, if you're using wood, you can create a frame surrounding the top of your bed, raised bed, where you can see it. So you can see in the frame while you tend the garden, again, minimizing that physical effort as you garden. Okay, so these are just examples of, at the top, we have an example of the artificial wood made of composite. You'll find them in many different sizes and colors. And then this is just another example of a raised bed in the table format. Just to give you some ideas, they don't always have to be sited on the ground. You can locate them in a terrace if that suits best for your site. Okay, now moving on to the last type of garden that we're going to discuss is containers. So you can grow a broad range of vegetables and herbs in containers. If you're considering using containers, you want to look for ideally varieties that are container friendly. You will also find them listed as bush varieties. They are more fitting for containers as they tend to be bushier or more compact. When thinking about using containers, one vital component is the drainage. You want to make sure that it has proper drainage. There are different materials that you can use, whether it's clay, plastic, ceramic. You want to be mindful about the size. So vegetables do need proper sizing for them to grow at their maximum potential. If you're looking to grow leafy greens, then you'll do fine with smaller containers. For example, this window box right here. So for leafy greens, you'll be fine in containers that have at least 6 inches, right? But for bigger crops, you definitely want to look for bigger containers, right? Diameters of around 20 inches to 14 inches, right? As well as depth. I have within this presentation, I'm sharing with you guys 2 different fact sheets that provide more information about container gardening. One of them provides a breakdown of particular sizes of containers per crop, right? So if you're looking to grow eggplants or tomatoes, or you might want to look into this particular fact sheet, it'll help you with the size. But in general terms, you want to make sure you have proper sizing for the crop that you're growing, and you want to look into varieties that are container friendly. They'll thrive and they'll do much better in containers than regular varieties. Another thing to be really mindful about is the potting mix, the fertilizer. Remember that this plant is going to get all its nutrients from that growing media. So you want to make sure that you blend in, that you provide those fertilizers through the soil, through the potting mix. And when it comes to the potting mix, when it comes to the soil for containers, you want to stay away from using soil from your garden, right? So it is not appropriate for containers, as over time they tend to get really compacted and not appropriate for containers. So for growing vegetables in containers, so you want to look into getting a potting mix for your container, and for sure you can add some compost if you wanted to as well, but you want to be mindful that you want to use the right potting soil to grow your veggies. There are many different options in terms of containers. You'll find self-watering containers like this one right here. This one has a water reservoir at the bottom, right? So if you tend to be forgetful or maybe are too busy and are not sure if you're going to be able to water your plants every day or every other day, self-watering containers might be a good option for you. You might want to look into that as well. And they come in different shapes and sizes. This one has casters, which is really, really practical if you need to move your container, if you need to move your container to harvest and have it closer to your kitchen. And if you're growing in containers and you're growing vines or cucumbers and tomatoes, keep in mind that you're going to need structures for them to grow vertically. And those could be trellises or cages. You can buy prefabricated trellises, or you can even make your own as well. Okay, now moving on to other things that you have to keep in your plan for your vegetable garden moving forward. Irrigation. So as far as irrigation, we figure vegetable crops need about 1 inch of water a week, whether that is water that they get from the rain, or whether that's water that you provide through irrigation. Ideally, with vegetable crops, we do want to make sure that when we water them directly in the ground, in the soil. We want to try to avoid overhead watering with our crops, especially during the afternoons and night times, right? Because that water will stay in the leaves, and within time that could give place for fungal pathogens, right? So we want to make sure, or we want to do our best to water our plants directly in the ground, in the soil. And when we're talking about irrigation, if you're doing manual watering, you want to make sure that you do deep, infrequent watering. So you go today in the morning, you water it thoroughly, and then you're going to let that soil dry before you water it again, right? And that's going to take some time for you to figure out, right? As you visit your garden, as you water your plants, as you go through the season, you're going to be deciphering it because it's going to change depending on your location, if you have a lot of wind, how much sun exposure you have, et cetera, et cetera. And there are some gardening kits. There are some systems that some technologies that you can use that are definitely water efficient when it comes to irrigating your vegetable garden. And so those could be, that is the drip irrigation system. There are also watering hoses that you can use, and you lay them directly in the ground in your beds. So when it comes to drip irrigation system, if you've never heard of this concept before, it consists of sorry about that. It consists of this drip line, right? You can think of it as a hose. And then, which in that hose, we place what we call drip emitters, which are these. So that's a close-up picture of what's right here. And so what that does, that it provides water to our plants directly in the ground where they need it. And it literally emits the water like in droplets. So you'll find these drip irrigation systems in your big box stores, you can consider using it for your raised beds. You can also use them in conjunction with controllers if you want to give that a try, so that the irrigation runs automatically. And some of these systems, they also have sensors, water sensors, which can help you in being more water efficient. So water sensors, what they do, once you program your control, it knows the level of humidity that you're looking for your soil. So let's say you have your system programmed for every other day and you have a heavy rain. What the water sensor does, it shuts down the control, lets the control know, hey, we have enough water in the soil, no need to water again. And you can also use these drip irrigation systems in your containers as well. And right here, I'm sharing with you guys a fact sheet that provides additional tips on how to be more user-friendly, more wise when you are watering or irrigating your garden or your yard. You can look into that fact sheet further on. Okay, so now we're moving on to those cropping techniques that are going to help you maximize space within your vegetable garden. So you selected the site, you already know what type of garden you're going to install, whether that is containers or raised beds or in-ground rows. So one technique that helps you maximize space is growing vertically. You can do that through using trellises or stakes. Right here, so this is my garden, the community garden. Right here, I have some snap peas growing vertically right here at the bottom, while I have some cauliflower growing over here at the bottom. So this provides me the opportunity to have two crops in that same row without them climbing all over each other. So if you have cucumbers or tomatoes or other vines within your vegetable garden, you can use vertical garden techniques to have them grow vertical, so they take less space. And also, in having them grow vertical, that way they don't crawl through the ground, which gives you less probability of having them exposed to insects or other plant pathogens that you might have. This is another example of vertical gardening. This one right here, this was a small raised bed that we made for a vegetable garden that was installed in a terrace. So right here, the way that we built this vertical structure was basically using a cattle panel. We cut it in a slab of 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide. We basically painted the cattle panel green just so that it looked more uniformly with the other components and the container and the whole thing. And then right here, what we have growing in this picture is a cucumber plant, a compact variety of cucumber plant. So we have it growing in combination with lantana. When you're growing in urban or suburban spaces, you want to make sure that you also select plants that have flowers to attract pollinators, especially for those fruiting crops. So we have a combination of lantana and cucumbers. Another technique that you can use to maximize space within your vegetable garden is known as square foot gardening. It is a technique that it was, oh my gosh, developed like in I think it was 1980s by a civil engineer by the name of Mel Bartholomew, I think it's last name. Yeah, Mel Bartholomew. He wrote a really good book explaining this method, but basically in a nutshell, it is a simplified method of gardening. It's a great method for beginner gardeners. and even experienced gardeners, but it's a really organized and systematic way of planting your crops. So it is a combination of using a raised bed with a grid system, which is what you can see right here. And that grid system, it's made of small boxes of 1 square feet each. That's why it's called the square foot gardening method. So within that grid system, you plant your crops. So between the combination of the raised bed with that that custom made soil mix and the grid system, this method uses a system of charts where you plant intensively. So you plant a specific amount of crops within each square, which in that grid system. And you can do that grid system with different materials. It could be wood, it could be a yarn. So it's basically a guideline for within that frame. So in essence, it is an approach to growing food that incorporates companion planting, intensive spacing, and getting the most food possible in a small space. So if you want to learn more about square foot gardening, you can visit their website right here, squarefootgardening.com. Another technique. Kate, how am I doing with time?
Hi, Cecilia. I know it was definitely a tall order to cover all this in an hour.
Okay.
We are at 12:58.
Okay.
So perhaps if you could cover the succession planting and the arrangement slides, and then we can take a couple of questions if people are able to stick around.
Sure. Okay. Okay, so succession planting, that's another technique that you can use within your vegetable garden design to extend your harvest period. Basically consists of seeding your crops at different intervals so that you can extend your harvest period and maintain a continuous supply. For example, you're growing leafy greens in this row, you seeded them 3 weeks ago, right? You seeded them, and then 2 to 3 weeks after, you're going to seed another row of leafy greens. That way, when you harvest these leafy greens, as you're eating them, you have another crop coming. So if you want to learn more about succession planting, Johnny Selected Seeds has a really good chart with different crops that can guide you in succession planting. You can either seed them, or you can also use transplants for succession planting. And moving on as fast as possible, another thing that you want to think about when you choose your crops is the arrangement of your crops within your plot and within your raised beds. As I mentioned before, if you can align your beds facing north to south, that would be ideal. That's not possible in some scenarios, but when you're spacing your beds, you want to be mindful of the space that you leave in between each bed in your pathways, in your pathways. So if you're planning to use a wheelbarrow to harvest and to move your tools, you want to have enough space so that you can walk in between those rows with your wheelbarrows on your tools. So that's something to keep in mind. And when it comes to planting arrangements, if you have taller crops like tomatoes or cucumbers or things that might provide shade for other plants, you want to locate them towards the north side of your garden, right? And if not, if you can't for some reason, then the second best option would be on the west side. Another thing to consider within your garden is keeping your perennials all together on one side, and that way you don't have to dig them out or disturb their roots as you're planting animals around them. So you can leave them in one particular area of your garden. Okay, Kate, those are the 2 slides that you mentioned I should cover. You want me to take some questions?
Yeah, so thank you so much. This is definitely, several webinars we could cover with this topic.
It's a lot. It's a lot to cover in an hour.
Yes, yes.
So you actually did a very good job of answering some of the questions that came up during the presentation, but there are a couple questions early on about amendments for the garden and using, like someone mentioned biochar and also worm tea. So I didn't know if you had some comments about amendments for the garden.
Well, in terms of, should I share my screen? Let me just, see if I can see you guys. There we go. Okay. In terms of biochar, I have never used biochar before. So
I've got some experience.
Okay, Bill, if you want to wade in.
Biochar is getting a lot of information right now, and a lot of the stuff is based on research that was done in South America. So it does have a lot of good properties. What it is it's basically, if you think of charcoal, and it's sequestering organic matter, and there's advantages of it to building the soil from that point of view. But we are doing a ton of research in the Northern Hemisphere on it right now. So everything that necessarily applies that you see in a lot of the literature is based on this, what's happened down in South America. So a lot of it depends on what the biochar is made from. All biochars are not the same. There's a lot of difference in them. So from a soil amendment point of view, there is a definitely benefit for it. But from the crop point of view, I can't tell you everything you want to know right now. I'm not telling you not to use it, but just be cautious. All biochars are not exactly the same.
Okay.
And do you have any experience with worm tea or compost tea?
Yeah, definitely. You can definitely use your worm tea in your garden. I do. So I have a indoor worm composter in my apartment, and I do use the worm tea for my houseplants and for my vegetable garden as well. Yes, absolutely. You just want to make sure that you dilute it with water before you apply it to your plants, to your crops.
And just remember, there's a nutrient content to it too, so you might be able to scale back some of your other nutrients on it, because you don't want to cause, you don't want to be environmentally unfriendly. I always tell people, don't kill it with kindness.
Absolutely, yes, great point, Bill.
There was another question about planting in raised beds, and you mentioned that we might be able to plant more densely in a raised bed as opposed to the traditional rows. Maybe you could talk more about that.
Sure. So part of the theory is, so we're in a leveled playing field within your raised garden, as opposed to raised rows where you have sort of like a groove or a mount. So within raised beds, you can fit in your plants more compactly, right? So you're kind of pushing the envelopes and reducing a little bit the space between each plant. And you find that information in your seed catalogs, in your seed packages, right? What's the appropriate spacing between each plant and each row? But when we're talking about raised beds, we kind of push the envelope a little bit, and we grow more intensively. But that goes hand in hand with also knowing the footprint of that particular crop that you're growing within your raised bed. So that should definitely be part of your planning phase for your vegetable gardening.
Oh, Bill, you're muted.
Bill, go
ahead,
ahead, Bill.
A great time talking to himself. You raised some important. Oh, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was gonna say, sorry. I was looking at the one question which you could probably help us with, Celia. How deep should your raised bed be? We get that all the time.
Okay, deep. It depends on what you're growing. If you want to grow a broad diversity of crops, 12 inches, right? That should be at least 12 inches deep. That's going to be good for your rooting crops, for your carrots. It's going to be good for your bigger crops like tomatoes. That's going to be deep enough for the root system. The narrower it shouldn't be less than 6 inches, but for 6 inches deep, that's going to work for your herbs and your leafy greens. I wouldn't plan on growing much root crops other than radishes and that depth of soil.
There was some interest in the grow bags for growing vegetables, and if you have experience with those, what might you recommend as a clean type of growing bag, or what types of bags to use?
Well, I don't have any experience with growing bags, but they are becoming more and more popular. I have gone to various sites where I've seen them being used, and it's a great technology. I think, yeah, it's a great technology. You want to keep in mind that it does provide great drainage. So that means that you have to water more frequently. That fabric, right? The water runs through. So you just want to make sure that that you water frequently. But I've never used them, not yet. But I've seen them in use with, oh my goodness, all the way from zucchinis to tomatoes to leafy greens. They come in a broad range of sizes.